And so the V1, doesn't seem to be a game changer in the way that a hypersonic rocket is a game changer. And even if it didn't have any explosive in it, like, as I say, 1 ton of amytol, the kinetic energy of 16 meters and several tons of metal and spent fuel and hitting you is going to devastate the best part of a street. So was it a potential game changer is a big question. Would cities have had to be evacuated if Hitler was pounding V2s on the British population? It's a big question. I think that would have been the case had the Nazis been able to have manufactured the V2s in the numbers required to be able to have done so. But by the time the V2 was coming on stream, to use a horrible managerial sort of phrase, it was very hard for the Nazi war machine to produce V2s in the quantities required. But saying that, would I want my family to be hit by a V2? No. Let's not be blasé about it. It was very deadly. But was it a game changer? Debatable.
Hello, I'm Zeb Baker-Smith, editor at Aspects of History. This week's helping of the podcast recounts the terror of the world's first ballistic missile and the heroic efforts of the Polish resistance, each contained in this tale of innovation and daring that reads like a wartime thriller, except it's true. Pairing up with Phil Craig for this episode of the Aspects of History podcast, author and historian Guy Walters gives a blow-by-blow account of the remarkable true story of the race to uncover the secrets of Nazi Germany's V2 missile program. His book, Stealing Hitler's Rocket, poses the question of whether said rocket could have changed the course of the war, observes at close quarters the intelligence battle to understand Hitler's fatal technology, and why this little-known operation deserves a place among the greatest secret missions of the conflict. Not to be missed is next week's offering as we bring you an interview with historian Katia Hoyer, whose Weimar, Life on the Edge of Catastrophe, offers a fascinating depiction of the period between 1919 and 1939 through the perspective of the small eponymous town and those of its residents. But for now, sit back and listen in to Guy Walters and Phil's conversation on stealing Hitler's rocket.
Guy, welcome to the Aspects of History podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to see you again, my friend.
You too. It was very funny. Before we get into the very serious business of your book, it did amuse me that the last time you and I spoke, I was on my own podcast, The Scandalmongers, and we mostly concentrated on Hitler's micro-penis, as I remember.
It's a subject that keeps growing.
Well, that's why I thought it was quite amusing. The next time we should speak should be about Hitler's massive rocket. So,
I mean, my book we're going to talk about is called Stealing Hitler's Rocket, but I do have a file name on my computer called Polishing Hitler's Rocket. But that might be a project for some other publication or some other publisher at least.
Brilliant. Well, look, you've written, well, I'm going to say congratulations on writing a great book. Actually, what I really mean to say is congratulations on writing a great movie script, because if this isn't turned into a film, I'll be very surprised.
That's always the goal. That's always the goal. I mean, it's one of those things which I know, any those of us who write books like you and all of us, and you always get someone coming up to you at a party going, what you really need to do is to sell the film script or the movie rights. And I'm going, oh, I haven't thought about that. I mean, it's like someone coming up to you saying, what you really need to do is to buy a winning lottery ticket. Oh, and I thought I might buy a losing one. So this does feel very filmic. There's no doubt about it.
No, you found an amazing story, one I'd never heard of, about a really kind of turning point in history. I mean, just going back, so we'll get into the plot in a minute, but, it made me think that London, a bit like Ukraine now, I suppose, was the very first place to be subjected to this terrifying and absolutely new form of unstoppable kind of death from the skies, which is what the V2 rocket was.
The V2 rocket was one hell of a piece of kit. I mean, that makes it sound a little bit anodyne. I mean, remind me, when did man first do powered flight? Well,
11?
11, 5, 9, 11, right?
Maybe a bit earlier.
But within, less than 40 years of that, you have got a ballistic missile that goes into space. It travels at 5 times the speed of sound. and you can fire it not across continents, but you can fire it across countries. And it's also a space vehicle. I mean, it is a space machine. It goes technically into space, I think. Just don't ask me too many technical questions. I think it's extraordinary. And why is it developed so quickly? Obviously, as you know and I know, that wartime brings about massive leaps in technological progress because you've got to get stuff done in war. And what you've got is the most terrifying weapon that can deliver a ton of highly explosive amatol at 5 times the speed of sound. So you would hear it arrive after it had hit you and killed you. It's a potential game changer. There's no doubt about it.
Did the Allies see it coming? Because it all seemed to happen very quickly.
There was this schism in the British governmental scientific complex, if you like, and in which you have some figures like Lord Charwell going, no, it's just not possible. And you have R.V. Jones, who is this, I think, brilliant figure, who is a scientific advisor for the government, an intelligence officer as well. And he goes, no, this is 100% possible. So do the British, do the Allies see it coming? Well, some of them do, and a lot of them don't. Because, yes, we all know that the Chinese invented rockets, right? I mean, but they didn't invent rockets that went, hypersonic and went hundreds of miles. I mean, rockets until the V2 were simply, battlefield artillery devices. So short answer is there were some who expected it, but their voices were struggled to be heard.
And when they first started landing, I mean, you mentioned the Woolworths incident. I mean, there were dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of casualties in one moment, and you couldn't predict when it was coming. There was no advance warning. Was there kind of thoughts that they'd have to re-evacuate the city or return to the sort of measures of the Blitz?
I think that's a really, really interesting question, because I think, just to step back a bit, you got the V1, right, which we all know, and I would say love, but we didn't love it. But the V1 almost has this kind of cuddly appeal, the doodle bug, and we know that a Typhoon or a Spitfire flying alongside it can flip it with its wings, and it can be shot down because it's going hundreds of miles an hour. And so the V1, doesn't seem to be a game changer in the way that a hypersonic rocket is a game changer. And even if it didn't have any explosive in it, like, as I say, 1 ton of amatol, the kinetic energy of 16 meters and several tons of metal and spent fuel and, hitting you is going to devastate the best part of a street. So it was, was it a potential game changer is a big question. Would cities have had to be evacuated if Hitler was pounding V2s on the British population? It's a big question. I think that would have been the case had the Nazis been able to have manufactured the V2s in the numbers required to be able to have done so. But by the time the V2 was coming on stream, to use a horrible managerial sort of phrase, it was very hard for the Nazi war machine to produce V2s in the quantities required. But saying that, would I want my family to be hit by a V2? No. Let's not be blasé about it. It was very deadly, but was it a game changer? Debatable.
So, how do your Polish heroes get involved in this story? Because that should kick off with your plot, really.
Well, the Polish hero, I mean, anyone who's watched Operation Crossbow, that, I don't know, came out in the 60s, right? And I can't remember who's in Operation Crossbow. I'm trying to remember now. You must have seen it, right?
I did. I used to watch all those bloody war films. It's all just Eagle's Dead out in my mind, I'm afraid. It's probably
That's literally these are the best Second World War film. I don't care. It just is, because it's so realistic. Poland, although it's occupied by 2 countries, and certainly in the area known as the General Government, which is the bit ruled by the Nazis, tyrannized by the Nazis, you have a very effective home army resistance network that is very well organized, very well led, very disciplined, and it also has a lot of intelligence feelers around that part of Europe. And it became very obvious to the Home Army and the Polish resistance that things were going on in Peenemünde, this area on the Baltic, which I'm sure some listeners may have been to, and where the V2 and V1 were being developed by Werner von Braun and his cohort and various other people like that. So word was getting back to Britain from the Poles that these weird machines were being developed and were being lobbed into the Baltic. Because obviously, if you're going to test a rocket, the best place to fire it is over the sea, because no one gets hurt in that way, unless they crash land in Sweden, and then sometimes the Swedes will find out bits and pieces of it. But so information is filtering back, and eventually through a combination of aerial reconnaissance and also just there's this wonderful woman called Constance Babington Smith who manages to identify a V2 from aerial photos. We work out that this place Peenemünde has got this awesome new machines being developed. So this is the topic of Operation Crossbow, the film. So anyway, we one night the RAF in 43 go and bomb the living crap out of it.
Right.
And there's no other way of explaining it. That's exactly what happened. And so the Germans go, well, obviously that we can't keep it here anymore. So what we'll do, we'll move this all to the south of Poland, to a place called today Blizno, what the Germans called Heidelager, and we'll test the rockets there, and we'll just fire them across land, and they're going to land about 200 miles, north. And we will. This is where we'll test. So basically, we're treating.
And if a few Poles get in the way of the tests, so be it.
Well, exactly. I mean, I can reveal to you today that the Nazis weren't very nice, and they didn't really give a stuff about the Polish, civilian population. I mean, I think I described in my book. It's like launching a sort of a V2 from somewhere like sort of Inverness or Dumfries and firing it up to Cape Wrath and the top left of Scotland. Okay, admittedly it's not very populated, but you've still got a fairly good chance of hitting someone. If it falls down in the wrong place. And if you want to watch some funny YouTube videos which aren't about cats, watch failed V2 rockets, because there are lots of sort of vintage German videos showing these rockets, just blowing up on the stand or just going haywire. And Dornberger, who was the major general who was in charge of the actual project, so Werner von Braun was the chief scientist. He sort of basically wrote to the Nazi high commander, or even Hitler, saying, do I have permission? Can you give me your sort of, waiver that I won't be held responsible for any of these things, hit civilians? And Himmler writes back and says, yeah, it's my responsibility. And Dornberger goes, well, that's fine. As I say, terrific, great guys. And so you're firing these rockets across open countryside, effectively, and they tend to land, 200 kilometers if they work, 200 miles, 200 kilometers, whatever, a bit further north, and of course, what happens when these things land is there's no explosive in them because they're just testing. They have a dummy ton of explosive, there's a race on to recover the bits and pieces between the Polish Home Army and resistors and the Germans, who say, look, if you are caught with any of this stuff, you are going to be, shot. But the Poles, bravely enough, turn around and say, sod it, we're going to grab as many bits and pieces as possible. And they're trying to work out, what is this thing? We know it flies very fast. We know it lands, and when it lands, it disintegrates. But what we're left with here is a kind of mangled jigsaw puzzle, if you like, with all the pieces slightly, even the pieces a bit broken up. And we don't have the box to the jigsaw puzzle that tells you what you got to rebuild.
Have the British asked them to look for this stuff, or are they acting entirely on their own initiative?
A bit of both, but they're largely acting on their own initiative. Absolutely. And so you've got this, and the Poles are analysing. There are various scientists in Warsaw and also in Lublin who are trying to analyse. Here's a casing. What's in it? There's some residue there. What's that residue? Oh, it's some form of weird fuel, or it's some form of this. Trying to look for guidance systems, and they've got a pretty good idea that this is some form of very, very fast projectile. But the big question is, what exactly is it? What does the whole thing look like? It'd be really nice if we could actually get our hands on one. And that's what I then write about in the book.
Hello, Zev here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories, and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben McIntyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts, and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99. That's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show.
And, there's quite a compressed timeline when they do get this stuff. The clocks are ticking and the rate, just going to talk me through the jeopardy that they find themselves in. Because, as you mentioned, the Germans have probably already worked out that some of their stuff is missing.
Well, yeah, the Germans don't always know where these things are going to land. I mean, right. and I think that, I don't want to give away too many plot spoilers in our conversation, but one of the big issues about the V2 is that it was not known whether it was remote controlled. So does it have, like today's drone, is it remotely piloted? And obviously what we know today is that the V2 was they whacked it up in the air. They had a reasonable idea of what the range was. If you fire it in the direction of London or Antwerp, it'll probably hit London or Antwerp because these are big targets. But you cannot be more accurate than a city with a V2. Right. But what's really essential to find out, and I know I'm going slightly away from your question here, is if this thing is remote controlled, we can jam it because it's controlled with radio waves.
Interesting, because they had something like that, didn't they? I remember doing a program, the Drain the Ocean series I used to work on, about these glider bombs, which were also like a ton, half a ton of explosives, and they were able to control them, and the Allies would have known about that.
And I think that trying to control something which goes 5 times the speed of sound is probably a bit harder than the glider bomb, because you need a very sophisticated form of. It had the V2 had a basic set of gyro. Well, now we'd consider it a basic, but had a set of gyroscopes in it that controlled the vanes and so on. But the jeopardy is that because the Germans don't know exactly where it's going to fall. The Poles may suddenly find a rocket that's landed and smashed to pieces in village X, and the inhabitants there and the home army there will turn up and recover some of the pieces quite well. And we tend to think that Poland's occupied, every village was crawling with Nazis. Well, of course it wasn't. Just imagine any part of rural Scotland, or even say occupied Crete, very rural, remote areas. They're not crawling with Nazis and Germans all the time. But by and large, there were German lookouts to where these things fell, and obviously the Germans had tried to get there quicker. The Germans had lorries, cars, you name it. They could generally get around quicker than the local. The word's very unfashionable now, but it was largely a peasant population.
On bicycles, if they're lucky.
But as I say in my book, the real godsend happens when a whole V2 lands outside a village called Sarnaki, and it goes splat into a marsh on the River Bug, and it doesn't blow up, it doesn't disintegrate, and it's just this entire V2 rocket. And what the fate of that entire rocket is what I write about, and hence it's called Stealing Hitler's Rocket, because I'm not polishing, but Stealing Hitler's Rocket, because suddenly the Poles have got. Wow, we've got this entire bloody 16 meters of rocket, in a marsh, on a river, 3 miles from a small village.
Must have been the most extraordinary sight. To come across that.
Have you seen a V2?
Yes, they're enormous.
Right. So anyone who's been to the Imperial War Museum or the Military History Museum, most good military history museums have a little V2 up their sleeve, but they are bloody enormous, and to find one sort of like lying in a marsh, hissing and ticking away, it's a real shock. So the challenge is, and this is, as you say, feels like a cinematic thing, is that the race is, first of all, right, what are we going to do with that? We could just let the Germans keep it, but our plucky, redoubtable Poles go, hell no, that's not going to happen. We're going to spirit. First of all, we're going to hide it, and then we're going to spirit it away, and then we're going to analyze it. And then when the British hear about it, they say, would you not awfully mind actually if we could have that back in Britain, please? So how the hell do you get a V2 rocket from
occupied Poland
to the aeronautical testing establishment in Surrey?
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult than saying flying an agent into Western France.
You don't just pop it in a suitcase on a Lysander and job done.
No, that's so interesting. That's the heart of the book, and it is exciting. It is old-fashioned.
It is exciting, and I sort of stumbled. I mean, I'd sort of heard the story before because I think the broader element of there's a lot of beef, isn't there, about the Polish contribution to breaking Enigma? Yes, and the Poles, if I remember rightly, and you might correct me here, the Poles have managed to get hold of one even before the war, and and a lot of Poles feel that the British take too much credit for Bletchley and so on and so forth. But so there's a bit of beef there, and then also the whole idea of intelligence about the V2 rocket was largely obtained by the Poles. And I don't want to make a massive plot spoiler, but that big rocket from the River Bug, somehow manages to get its way back to Britain, and so it's. You go to Sarnaki in northern central Poland. Well, no, it's central eastern Poland. They've got a monument. They've got a stylized V2 sunk into the ground right in the middle of town, and the display says, we save London, wow. Because we got this, and it's a story that no one in Britain really knows. Did smuggling this V2 out of Poland save London? No, it didn't. But did it supply getting that rocket out with a vital piece of information, whether the rocket had a guidance system or not? Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
And the reason why that's important, because when we knew that it didn't have a guidance system, we didn't have to waste brain power, men, resources, material, technology on working out how to jam it.
Of course.
So you just said, right, it's got gyroscopes. We can't hack it. So, the best thing we can do is just try to find out where it's being produced and bomb it. But of course, it was being produced at a place called Nordhausen Underground, and we couldn't. But it just meant that we didn't waste our time. So sometimes it's good just to find out what you can't do as opposed to what you can do, so you're not going up a dead end all the time. You're not wasting your time. And so, but I mean, it is this sort of extraordinary story that the Poles, really care about. And hopefully my book will be a corrective that I think, they should be bloody proud of this because they did help. And also, frankly, fair play. We know now how the V2 worked. We know how the war's going or gone. At the time, we're talking about mid-44, it's vital that we get to know as much as we can.
Absolutely.
And so to get it out there is commendable and brave.
We just produced a book on 1945. I mean, there was an enormous sag in morale in the summer and autumn of 44 because everybody sort of thought after D-Day and then the fall of Paris, well, this will be over in weeks. That it's all falling apart. And yet the Germans managed to fight on for nearly another year and had things like the Battle of the Bulge and the V2s. And January 45 is a really bad time.
That's a really good point. And yes, that inertia, that feeling of inertia, isn't there? And that sort of churn. And the V2 is a scary thing. And if you can work out how to stop it, or if you want to know as much as you can about it. I mean, what are we seeing at Ukraine today? There is this constant technological innovation arms race going on. And there's no doubt that you've got to learn as much as you can. So, does it save London? No, because you can't really stop V2s, as we found out. But it's good to know that you can't stop them.
Yes,
then you're not wasting. Then you're not wasting your time trying to stop them. And that's the important thing. So, but I think that the Poles need. I'm not qualified to talk about Enigma, but I'm definitely qualified to talk about the V2, and they do need recognition for this. And I only came across the story because I was I was in a show called Hitler's Secret Missions, which has still not reached British television because it's obviously too good. But anyway, it was made by I'm based in Prague now, as you know, which is why I couldn't make your birthday party. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
And
Forgiven.
happy birthday. And I came across it because then the TV company who I work with here in Prague said, let's do Churchill's Secret Missions. So I was kind of looking at what are the kind of coolest missions done by the Allies, secret missions. And then suddenly, of course, I come across this, which is called Operation Wildhorn 3. And I thought, okay, I mean, why is that not a book?
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice feeling. Well,
Yeah.
you start and end the book with very personal accounts of being in certain places. I mean, it feels to me like this kind of got under your skin, this story, a little bit. Is that fair?
I went to Blizna, I went to the airfield where this British Dakota lands in the middle of the night. Again, not too many plot spoilers, I hope, but and even the story of how that manages to fly away is something else. And it is, there are sort of slightly, the Poles take pride in it, but there's not much sign apart from a peeling board, in the meadow where the Dakota arrived to take away the V2. And it's now flooded. It's a lake. There are fishermen there, and it's just a muddy track. And you sort of have the place to yourself. You sort of know in Britain if something like that had happened, there would be a whole kind of infrastructure now and a theme park, and I don't know. It would be overly commercial. It would be too much the other way. It would be overly remembered.
Yeah.
And whereas as I say in Sarnaki up on the River Bug, yeah, it's a kind of okay. I went there in November, and I love Poland, but not all of it is charming. And it was like kind of okay. How long do I need to be here?
So I think quite a few people, if your book does as well as I think it'll do, quite a few people have been turning up on little pilgrimages. They should open a tourist gift shop or something.
I think they should. They sell little V2s, little V2s, something like that.
So I've used the word on this phrase about my own work sometimes, likely novelized, which I would say of your book too. Now, what are your rules for this? I mean, do you have a sort of set of
my
principles?
rules are is that there's a shortage of material, and there's a disclaimer at the front of the book that says it's kind of lightly novelized. I think certainly what it's a nod to is some of those history books in the 60s and 70s, which you just have to go, I can either write this really straight, or I can make a decision to just sort of slightly. My background's writing fiction. I read English. I've written 4 thrillers. I've written chick lit under a different name, which I don't know if you know that. Yeah,
I did not know that.
A Diary of a Hapless House Husband by Sam Holden.
Okay.
I've written and Growing Pains. So I just sort of thought, well, you know what? I kind of let's have some fun here. Let's just.
But would you,
out.
for example, I'm writing a book about a convoy, so it's a very narrow time, a bit like, in some sense, a little bit like your story, in that it's all quite compressed, ticking clocks, etc. And I would love to create a composite character, but I'm telling myself I shouldn't. I should only use words of people I didn't actually know existed.
And I mean, my last book was about The Great Escape, and I was very serious and very strict with myself about everything. And it's obviously it's a brilliant book, but I sort of felt that sometimes you can. It's not like I don't want to take it seriously. It's just that I also think that we're in the entertainment game at a certain level, and I think that I've written lots and lots of pieces for mid-market newspapers, in which you are taking some license but remaining true to the truth of the story, the thrust of the story. And so, yeah, that's how I defended the approach. I think I don't know whether I pull it off. I don't know, but I just think that there's a certain amount of it's you have to sort of make a decision about what genre you sit in, and sometimes I think you can sit in both. I mean, certainly, I think so many history books in the 60s and 70s were this novelized approach to history. And I sort of think, well, what's wrong with that if you're telling the actual moral truth of the story?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there is always going to be a market for massive, thick volumes of lists, and this unit went here and they had this problem, they're digging latrines, and just detail. Some people like that, but most people like a great yarn.
I think Great Yarn was where I was going, and I mean, I'm not a military historian as per se. I've never written about battles and war, and I barely know what a division is from a squadron. I mean, it's so. I felt that there was just a case of, let's have some fun here. I mean, you go to the full log and you just say, right, this is a novel, job done. But maybe I sit somewhere in the hinterland, and hopefully it pays off.
I would not anticipate any carping criticism of your books. It's fantastic. But if there was to be any, you could look forward to seeing in your lovely Bermuda shirt by the pool in Beverly Hills, signing your film deal.
Having won the lottery ticket. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Look, thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation. Is there anything else we should know? Is there anything else you need to tell us to make people want to buy this book even more? Something that makes you particularly proud, surprised you?
I just think it's I'd long since wanted to write. Sometimes having done the Great Escape book, I sort of thought there must be a sort of secret mission in the Second World War that is as good a watch as Where Eagles Dare. It's got all the elements in it, and this feels like it. People dressed up as Germans, bluffing their way through checkpoints. Bring it on.
Oh, bring it on every time. It's an absolute hoot. I think it'll be a massive success. And Guy, thank you for your time. And we can all go back to micropenises next time. See you later.
I'll turn my video off then.
Bye, mate.
Thanks so much for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please share with friends and family and keep your eyes peeled for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch, you can through X or email history@aspectsofhistory.com. But until then, thank you and good night.